and welcome to Gen Friends. I'm your host, Cheri Hudson Passey from Carolina Girl Genealogy, and we've got, as usual, a fabulous panel. We've got Melissa Barker, our archive lady. Hi, Melissa.
Hello, hello. Hope everyone's doing all right tonight.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're all doing well. I'm glad you're here. We've got Mary Kircher Roddy from MKR Genealogy. Hi, Mary.
Hi, everybody.
Good to have you. Shelley Murphy, our family tree girl's here. Hi, Shelley.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well.
And Laura Hedgecock, treasure chest of memories, ladies in the house too. Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I too hope everyone's doing well tonight.
Exactly. Well, what we decided, we usually as a panel discuss the Finding Your Roots episodes, and we are running a little late from other things that we've been doing, guests we've had to interview and things like that. So what we thought we would do is take the last 2 episodes of season 6 and the first episode that just aired for season 7, and each of us choose one of our favorite celebrity stories that they had on there, and we were going to talk about that, so that way we can kind of catch up with Finding Your Roots. And what we'd love to hear is what your favorite episode was, or who your favorite celebrity was and why, and what did you learn? Did you learn a new methodology, a new record group, a new technique? What did you learn from watching the show? So I'll just go first because mine will be really short, and then we'll move on to everybody else.
No fair, no fair. Can I make a comment first?
Yes, sure.
I love the 2 quilts behind Mary, the quilt behind Mary and the quilt behind Laura. They are beautiful. They're beautiful.
Thank you. This quilt was actually pieced by my husband's grandmother and hand quilted by my husband's great grandmother, her mom.
Oh my
and
goodness.
in the 1950s, and
Yeah.
you know, we inherited them after Grandma Nellie died, and they've been sitting in a box in the attic. And I've been thinking about them, and I said to Mark, what would you think if I used some of Grandma Nellie's quilts for a backdrop? So
Yeah.
so I've got this one, and I have
It's
another one. This is
beautiful.
the grandmother's flower garden, and I thought you guys would appreciate it.
It's
So
beautiful.
And,
Laura,
and
tell us about
are
yours.
those little squares?
they're
Yes.
hexagons.
Oh my God.
Which
And
is harder to quilt than
Yes.
I mean, and each of them, I mean, they interlock.
Yeah.
Wow.
Quilting around the inside of each of them and around the inside of the next one. So it's
not
I
on a
mean, there's
machine.
So,
No.
oh no,
Oh no.
all hand done.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Beautiful, Mary.
perfect stitches. I just,
Beautiful.
it's really,
It's
I just
beautiful.
feel so
What a
honored to
treasure
have it. So
What a treasure.
Grandma Nellie, and then her mom, Grammy, Hannah Allender White. Let's see, Hannah Allender Aldrich White. Yeah, she lived to 99 years old.
Bless her heart.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, both of them are beautiful.
Gorgeous. Laura,
Yeah,
you have a
thank
story
you.
about yours?
Yeah.
yeah, I bought it.
You sound like me. I bought it.
That's okay. It's still beautiful.
In Shipshewana, Indiana. It's an Amish quilt,
Yeah.
so hand pieced, hand quilted,
Oh,
but not by a relative. Sorry.
okay.
Oh.
Well, the main real reason why I wanted to go first is because I wanted to hold this up. I wanted to, you can see it.
The NGS quarterly.
Quarterly for December 2020.
Somebody's got an article in there
Somebody
that
on our panel, Mary Kircher Roddy, has an article in the NGSQ, and we just wanted to tell her congratulations.
Thank
That-
you.
This is your second one.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Fabulous, fabulous. So congratulations, Mary.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
That is wonderful. So with that, I will just talk real quick about Nora O'Donnell and her story on episode. The episode that she was on, they were talking about Irish immigrants, and so people immigrating into the United States. And I don't have any Irish immigrants, but I know who Nora O'Donnell is. I thought I've got to look at her story. And what I loved about it was they were going through family stories and trying to say, well, this is what I know, and seeing if what the family was telling her was true or not. And we know how that goes sometimes, right? Sometimes there's this little teeny bit of truth. And she was talking about her, well, both sides really, how they were really poor. And she was saying how when she went to college and she was able to go into a Target and buy the quilt for her bed, and that, you know, her mom was just in tears. And she's like, Mom, we're in Target buying a quilt for college. And she says, you don't understand. We were so poor. We had nothing. And here you are going to college and we're buying things for your dorm room. So, you know, I thought that was really touching, but it shows you where she came from, you know, where she came from. So they started with her maternal line, and all she knew was that her grandmother had come from Ireland at 12, and I mean, not 12, at she was 12 when she was working, and then she was the oldest of like nine kids. So she was working in a factory in Belfast. And of course, Belfast is a Protestant, predominantly Protestant, and his family was Catholic. So that tells you right there, there was a little bit of strife. And so she left.
A little.
Just a little. So she left on her own and came to the United States with $20. That's all she had was $20. I can't even imagine the bravery to do something like that, you know. They were able to find her on the ship manifest, and she came into the United States. She got married, she got a job, you know, all these things, and everything seemed great until they flipped the page and they said, oh, and she became a citizen, and they had that paperwork, and he flips the page and she said, and he said, then it was denied.
It was canceled.
It
Not
was
denied.
canceled. That's right.
It was
Canceled. Yeah, thank you,
canceled.
Mary. Thank you, Mary. It was
canceled.
canceled. What the heck? Why was it canceled? So as they did more research, it turns out that when she applied for citizenship, she was married, but she said she wasn't on the paperwork. And the reason she said that was because her husband was an illegal alien. He did not have his citizenship, and she was afraid that if she put that on the paperwork, then he'd be deported. So that I thought was really, really interesting. And they didn't know that in the family story. That was not part of the family story. But they did end up, both of them ended up getting their citizenship. They were able to work through that process. He wasn't, neither one of them were deported. They were able to get their citizenship with the United States. So I thought, what a fun story to pass down, you know. And the story too was that he had, this is the right one, right? That they said that he, yes, that he had stowed away her grandfather coming into America. But what they found out was, see, remember that those family stories, there's always that little teensy bits of truth, right? That you've got to research. It turns out that they found him on a ship going to Canada. She's like, well, then I don't understand. Well, it turns out he went to Canada, and then he got on a train and came to America, but he didn't, there was no forms, no, he didn't fill anything out. So he came into America illegally. And so he doesn't really stow away, but he got on the train and came in illegally. So that's kind of where that story all fit together, and kind of like they told her, you know, that telephone game, they talked about that one person tells one person who tells another person, and then the story kind of changes a little bit. I also like the fact when she was talking about her grandmother in Ireland, she said the context of the story really matters, meaning you've got to understand why she would have left. This is what we're hearing. She left because of the fact that she was a Catholic and she was living in a Protestant area with so much strife and turmoil. So, but it made me wonder, they really didn't go into this very much, but if she was working, the oldest of 9 children, what did they do when she left? You know, did she struggle with that? You know, I wonder, it made me wonder what more to the story there was on her maternal side.
But wasn't she also the one on that parent, or am I thinking of someone else? It might have been another person, the 16 years. Was that him, or was that?
It was her grandfather. He actually lived here for 16 years under the radar.
Right,
before they figured out that he was not a citizen. So I thought that was pretty funny that, you know, he was able to do that. And then they turned to his her paternal side, and she had her O'Donnell great grandfather came from Ireland to Scotland, and he was working in a shale. Was it shale or was it shale? I believe so.
I think it was shale.
Shale factory. So they were digging that up, you know, mining that. And her great grandmother had come over and done the same thing. She wasn't working, but her husband at the time was. So she had been married more than one time. And what they discovered was they actually discovered that her first husband was hit in the head by a piece of this rock, and it killed him. And they discovered that their neighbor, Mr. John O'Donnell, witnessed the accident, and he was the one that was the informant on the death certificate for her great-great-grandmother's first husband. And he was a neighbor, and I guess they knew each other well, and they ended up getting married. But what I thought was the most interesting thing about this is that she fought this in court. She took this case to court. Her name was Sarah. She took this case to court and filed what we would think as workman's comp. You know, she said, you know, he died because there wasn't safety precautions. And she won. She won, which I think is just incredible that she won. And they said this was really the forerunner of workman's comp in the United States. Well, in Britain, you know, it spread to other industries, and then it came over to the United States. And so what a cool thing to find out that your ancestor did something like that, you know. And the records, I thought the records were really cool. They had the transcripts of the case files that they were going through so they could read the testimony. We don't think about things like that very often, you know. And so it was in the newspaper, and then they were able to search and find the actual transcripts of the court files. So I thought that was wonderful. And then just to end this up really quick so we can move on, you know, they always do DNA, right? You got to do the DNA. So Skip says to her, well, you are related to someone on, you know, on the show, somebody that has a tie to the show, not somebody who's been on the show. And she's like, what? You know? And he, of course, says, turn the page. And there's this picture of this man. And he says, do you recognize this person? She's like, no. Look closely. Does he look like anybody? And she goes, oh. And he goes, that's my father. So she's related to Henry Louis Gates Sr. Isn't that interesting?
That's
on his
cool.
side. So what a shock that must have been for everybody on the show. I thought that was great. I love it when they do that and they show the ties between people that have been on the show. So anyway, so that was Nora O'Donnell, and I thought that was just really fun to do the whole thing about family stories and different records that we haven't seen before, like the transcripts and things like that. So, and that cool DNA. Who would like to go next?
I know we didn't Melissa do from the same episode? The same?
I don't think so.
No.
I
Oh,
don't
okay.
think so. And I'm Gayle King, and that's not the same episode.
No, you and I are the same episode. Okay.
Melissa, do you want to go next?
Sure.
Okay.
Me and Mary did the same episode with different people.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and in that episode, like they did in some of the previous episodes. I mean, they didn't show us DNA anyway, but and then I don't think they even talked about DNA.
Oh.
But anyway, I did Glenn Close, the actress Glenn Close, and she had a very interesting history. Her history goes back to the 1600s. You know, her family was here pretty much at the beginning or before the beginning, you know, and so, but it's interesting. One of the common threads, I would say, from Glenn Close all the way back to her beginners is religious sects. The one that she was in, she called a cult because her parents were
her parents, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the one that her Glenn Close and her parents put her in. I don't even remember the name of it now, but anyway, and she got out of that, and that's when she went on to become an actress and everything. But then when you go back further, her ancestry was Quakers. I'm not saying that's a cult, but some say that it is, you know, but anyway, and then you keep going back further, and then she has ancestry in Puritans.
Oh, wow.
And so, very interesting. The one on the Puritan side, John Strong and Abigail Ford, had 17 children.
Whoa.
Now, my grandmother was the last of 14 children. And so I thought, wow, 17 children, okay. But they estimate that those particular people and their children, their descendants are in the hundreds of thousands.
Wow.
And so, and they were talking, they talked about some of the ones that she was related to, a lot of famous people.
Mhm.
And one of the ones that they mentioned is that she was the 8th cousin of Princess Diana.
Right.
Wow.
So that was pretty interesting.
And
But-
Clint Eastwood too.
And Clint Eastwood.
Yes.
Yes.
Very nice.
Which was really funny and nonchalant because he asked her, Henry Louis Gates, did she know him? She says, no. Who doesn't know Clint Eastwood?
No, I think she probably knew him as an actor, but you know, when she
Right.
says, "Do you know?" Well, no, I don't know him.
I know.
No,
You
I know who
know.
Clint Eastwood is, but I don't know
Exactly.
Clint Eastwood.
No,
But that's how I took it. It was
Yeah, I know. She did. She was very, yeah. But you know, and as that was on her mother's side. All of this is on her mother's side, and it was just very and Henry Louis Gates even said, you know, that she is a conglomeration of all of our founding. You know, and you know, and then he asked her, you know, he does all the time. He says, "How does that make you feel?" or things like that. And she made a statement that I think that a lot of us can relate to as genealogists. She said, "It makes me feel stronger."
Ah, I like that.
You know, and I think that I think a lot of us, especially if we are the kind of genealogists that we dig into the stories, we try to find all the aspects of our ancestors, we you know, we do all of that. I think that no matter what we find, I think it does make us feel stronger because it's more of a foundation,
Right. I
you know, for
agree.
us to work from. And then they went to her father's side, and her father's side was from the South, Virginia, actually. And she found out that her family owned 9 slaves. Actually, you know, then when you go back, you know, his father owned slaves, and back and they owned slaves, things like that. So, very interesting family. She said that, you know, of course, the southern part she didn't know much of anything about because she spent her time in New England. So it just was not really talked about. But very, very interesting. I would say that they didn't really, for my taste, show very many records. It's like they were filming her, and then the other one that was in that Mary will talk about, and you know, the book of life that they give them.
Yes.
It's like they had records there, and they were reading the transcripts, and every couple, 2 or 3 times maybe they would show the record, but for the most part they didn't show a whole lot of records. That's what I miss. I miss that. I wish they would at least show the records.
Right, because
you
I was
know.
going to ask you, with all that church, all the church connections, did they show many church records?
They
'Cause you said
showed
the
a
Quakers
birth
were all
record.
top,
They showed
yeah.
a birth record in, I think, was in the Quaker records.
The meeting, there was
The
a
meeting
meeting
records.
record.
Yeah.
The meeting house. Yeah.
And then they showed one other record where her ancestor got in trouble for adultery. Was it
Yeah,
adultery?
something like that.
Yeah. And so, you know, but like I said, I don't know. That's just me though. I want to see a lot of records, which I know it's only a 1-hour show.
Yeah, exactly.
But-
That's what
Yeah.
a lot of us watch it for, though. It's like we talked about at
Yeah.
the beginning, methodologies. You know, how are they
Absolutely.
finding people?
Yeah.
What kind of
Yes.
records are they finding? You know, so the light bulbs go off for us, going, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even think to look there."
Well,
So,
and you know, and one thing
yeah.
you can get from watching these shows that you know, I kind of try not to be so harsh on that part of it, is as they're talking about their ancestors and their history and what they're bringing up, I'm thinking to myself, okay, well then they had to have found records for that.
Mhm.
And so that tells me, okay, maybe, you know, it's like, I think they probably did a lot of research in different religious sects records, such as the Puritans and the Quakers. And so I'm thinking, okay, that's something to put down to think about, you know, those kinds of records. And so that was pretty interesting. I really enjoyed her story. I mean, I've seen her, you know, I've seen her as an actress and stuff, but I didn't know much about her as a person.
Mhm.
And so, you know, and I don't know about anybody else, but if I ever like will see a movie with one of these actors or actresses or one of these famous people in them that we've seen on one of these shows, I kind of connect with them a little more because
Yeah,
I've
too.
seen them in this.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, it's kind of like an old familiar friend a little bit, and so that makes it kind of neat. So, but in this same show, there was only two in this show, and the other one is the one that Mary's going to talk about. And so I couldn't help but watch his too. I watched the whole show, and so his was also very interesting and so I'm excited to see what Mary's got to say.
Let's let Mary go forward then.
Okay.
Tell us, Mary.
So I am going to talk about John Waters. And, you know, it was interesting on the episode. A lot of the episodes have 3 people. This only had the 2. And they
Why do you
were,
think that was, Mary? Do you think it's because they had more information about them, or I
You
wonder
know-
why they only had the 2?
yeah, and they didn't really appear to be a super big theme. I mean, between the 2 of them, but they showed a lot of different disparate pieces of history. They didn't really, it was broad and not particularly deep.
Gotcha.
They just touched a lot of things, but and talked about them, but you know, some other ones they go more into depth. So it felt a little different.
And to me, it seems to me like the ones that they used to do years ago, you kind of followed that straight line,
Mhm.
you know, and now it's not, they don't do that, and which, you know, I know
Yeah.
they're trying to be
But don't you
entertaining, but
think
Right.
it couldn't that, because they didn't follow, I hate to say it this way, but do you think they had enough information to really tell some good stories versus other one? You know what I mean? It's almost like they went longer, but again, it didn't follow anything. I don't want to say filler, but there wasn't a lot of story in there. So
Well, to me, it was like we found this really good story. Oh, and then we found
and
this one.
that's
We
it.
found this
Yeah.
one. So
Yes.
we gotta tell on those. And so they didn't cover them as
I don't
deeply
know
because they
why.
wanted to touch each of them. So
Oh,
anyway,
okay.
that was
I
my
just think
thought.
it's us, because I think when we see
Yeah.
that, we want to go,
We're
oh, but
picky.
what happened between here and here? I want to know what happened between these 2 stories.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's exactly
Yeah.
what I did. I mean, Cheri and Melissa have gone through and, you know, kind of get a little chronology of the episode, and then they covered this, and then they covered that. Well, I am a research addict, and
Yes, she is.
so you know, I mean,
Which
they
is
were talking.
why you've got an article in the queue.
Exactly.
Second article.
Exactly.
Her second article.
Yes.
They were talking to John Waters, and they talked about, I think it's his grandfather, would be his mother's dad, and his great grandfather, both named. Why can't I think of the name?
Clifford. Something.
Yeah, Clifford Whitaker.
Whitaker.
Carroll Whitaker was the great grandfather, and Clifford E. Whitaker was his grandfather. And so they talked about that Clifford Carroll Whitaker was married in 1898 near Seattle. Okay, now I hear the word Seattle,
yeah.
and then I'm just down the rabbit hole. It's like, oh, gee, I wonder where she lived. You know, I could go find her, and I wonder how many blocks she was from my house in Seattle. So I was like totally down that rabbit hole, and I probably missed most of the rest of what was going on in that show, because all I could think of was Seattle. So that's what I did when the episode was over. It's like, okay, I got to get on my computer and figure this all out. I'll be a little sensitive here. I don't know if it's an East Coast thing that, you know, isn't every place in Washington State near Seattle.
Yes.
Yeah. So no, they were, we've got the dividing line of the Cascade Mountains in Washington State. And so there's Eastern Washington and Western Washington. And they were over in Eastern Washington, totally different climate, different culture, different everything over there. So I wouldn't say it's all that close, but I was able to find the marriage record and found that. And then he said, you know, that Clifford and his wife, Bertha, had a baby right after they got married. They went to Alaska, where he was a minor, had a baby, but Dawson City wasn't a place to raise children. So she went back to Seattle, I think is what they said. Well, and then he he died in 1902, and they really covered, they were very interested in the story. He was outside of a store that sold guns. And I think he was maybe, wasn't really clear whether he was looking at the gun or somebody else, but the gun accidentally discharged and killed him. And so he was, you know, in his 30s, had a wife and a very small child who lived somewhere else, and he died all of a sudden. So, and then in the episode, they said that she went back to, I think it was Maryland, maybe, where his family lived. And there was a custody fight with her mother-in-law and her over this Clifford's child. And they made it sound like she had gone back there right away. But I really found evidence that she actually was in Washington, and he was going to school in Ellensburg. This kid, I found school records for him. So I was thinking of Melissa with the school records, because I know she talks about that. But the really interesting part that I had seen her on the census, she came from California, which is another interest of mine, where I came from, Sacramento. And I'm thinking mining gold, and it's near the California gold mining area. And her father then left there and was gold mining in Washington State. And I learned a whole bunch of history that I didn't know about my own backyard, about gold mines, and found a bunch of newspaper articles about her father. You know, a $250 gold nugget that he sold to somebody who took it to the Chicago World's Fair for display.
Wow.
And another article where he came away after a week's work with 7 $20 gold nuggets.
My goodness.
Yeah, and reading these newspaper articles, Clifford was a miner in Alaska, and he was a miner in Washington as well before he went to Alaska. And I think that that's probably how he met his wife. He was, you know, mining in the same community as her father, and probably got introduced to her. So that was really interesting. And so it's these stories that they didn't cover any of that at all about her, Bertha's mother. So it would be, I mean, Clifford was John Waters' great-grandfather. Bertha's his great-grandmother. And her father was one of the earliest California gold mining pioneers.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, when I read his obituary from 1921 or 22, there was a whole bunch of history with him. And it was not as spectacular as the gunshot in Dawson City. But it really, there's so many stories. And you know, I don't know what that book of life included and whether he got all this cool stuff that I found.
It's like you want to call him up and say, hey,
I know, I totally did. Look what I found, John.
Stop you.
So, so anyway, there's, you know, whatever story that they tell, whatever story you find, there's still so much more to look for. So don't ever stop.
What I found interesting about John Waters is the fact that his family was rich, and he decided to go out and mine and live that life.
Yeah.
And then, you know, and then the part that got me, that I wanted to know more about, was when his wife went back to Maryland, and there was that custody battle over the son, and she ended up getting all the inheritance for her deceased husband. The courts ruled in her favor. First of all, I thought, why is she having to fight for custody of her own son?
So what I did discover is that Clifford's father had died maybe in the early 1890s. So before Clifford went to Washington. And he was
they
an
didn't
only
say
child.
that. Yeah.
Oh, no, they did not say that. And he was an only child. So that Clifford Edmund, the grandson, was the only piece
that
of the son.
That little piece right there explains a lot.
I know. And that none of that came out in the episode. So, you know, just a whole bunch of the reasoning. And then I found his World War I draft record. And he was actually living in Maryland, and his employer was his grandmother. But his next of kin was his mother, who was living at the time in Victoria, British Columbia, with her second husband, who she married after her first husband died.
Now, isn't
So-
that the Clifford that started as a delivery boy and then ended up owning the company? Or was that in Glenn Close's?
That had to be somebody different. Yeah.
No, that
that's
was
some-
Glenn
yeah,
Close's.
Yeah.
That was Glenn Close's grandfather.
Because
He started out being,
yeah.
yeah, no,
They
yeah,
start going together, don't they?
I know.
I know.
But yeah, no, Glenn Close's grandfather started out as a delivery boy in this particular company, and
Yeah.
he ended up owning the company.
Wow.
Yeah.
worked his
And
way
this,
up.
that was like in today's dollars, $25 million company
Yeah,
or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a lot. Yeah.
It was a lot.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, but it was really fun doing this little side bit of research.
I love how you always do that. It's so funny. We need to let the Finding Your Roots people know that if they need a researcher
Yes.
available,
You can let them know you'll be doing it anyway.
you'll be
Yes.
doing it anyway.
Don't
and
tell
you would
them I'll
like
do it
to
for
be
free.
paid for
Yeah.
it.
Oh, that's too funny.
No
Work
charge.
them a deal.
Shelley,
So-
you want to?
Yes.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Laura. Were you going to say something?
Oh, I was going to ask if I could go next, but Shelley
Oh,
can go.
sure. Go ahead. Go ahead, Laura.
Okay.
You, Shelley.
I'm good.
Okay.
Same show.
Did Issa Rae, who's a comedian, and I thought she would be interesting. She's the one that was a YouTube sensation with the Misadventures of an Awkward Black Girl, and she's done Insecure.
Insecure.
And she spent some of her teenage years in Senegal. So I thought she'd be really interesting. But I really would recommend everybody watch this episode because, and I liked Jordan Peele's stuff too. It really shows you how the stories can throw you for a loop.
Mm.
And hers really did. I don't want to give too many things away, but I probably will. But on her father's side, so the paternal side, they traced him back to, an ancestor back to Senegal, her great grandfather. And during the First World War, the French were out of soldiers, so they started conscripting people from their empire holdings.
Wow.
So this man was given no choice and was sent off to France to fight, and eventually was killed.
Mm.
And so by the time he finished telling her that story, she said, I wrote down a quote, "I don't even know him, but I'm just mad."
Whoa.
When she found out, oh, I had this ancestor, and then he was conscripted.
Mhm.
And then when she found out that he was killed, and the French commander gave him all sorts of accolades for bravery, etc. But she said, you just gave him to me, and now you've taken him away in one fell swoop.
Oh.
And that just really struck me that we think these stories are such adventures and we're watching as outsiders. And she was so articulate in making you see that this was a highly personal experience for her, and not all good. I mean, it is kind of hard to get that book of life at you and go through the pages and we find out things about our families one tidbit at a time.
Right.
And you might find one surprising thing, like, oh, he served in this army, and eventually, but she was getting it boom, boom, boom.
Mhm.
Not that I think they did anything wrong. I think it's just the nature of the beast. But then when he went to her maternal side, he found a third great grandfather who was listed in the 1860 census in Louisiana. And he's like, so he had to be a Black free man because
Right.
otherwise he wouldn't have been listed by name. So they start researching him and his ancestors, and they go back to French Haiti, where he was a white Frenchman living in Haiti, and in Haiti they had a slave revolt. And so this one ancestor, of course, got away and went to Louisiana, but his father was killed in the slave revolt. And she's like, why am I feeling happy about the death of an ancestor?
Yeah.
Shelley?
Yeah.
she was like she was laughing kind of inappropriately, like, I don't know why I'm laughing, but yeah. But her story also explained a weird situation. I wasn't aware of how common it was, but he said in the 1840s, 40% of free Black households had slaves.
Mm.
And so she had an ancestor who was impregnated by the slave owner and then was freed along with her daughter by the slave owner. So, as she said, that is some twisted family history. But yeah, it was very interesting. I like the story as much as the research. I always feel like they can handle the research. I did like knowing, oh, wow, you can go back to Haiti during a slave revolt and find records of who survived and who didn't. And, you know, they did show the original records of like census and things like that. But yeah, the stories that, you know, she got served up to, that was very, very strange. And she had fun. And the surname of the family that came from the white Frenchman in Haiti that had come down that line, she said, oh, well, that branch, they're the light-skinned branch. It's like, for good reason.
Right.
So I thought it was really, really fascinating to listen to these things and all this, the French connections on both sides of her family, which I guess is how she ended up in Louisiana.
Yeah.
But, you know, the connections to Senegal are even present day. So it was very, very interesting.
Wow. And, you know, it gives us hope too, you know, because they're people. Just because they're actors and actresses doesn't mean that they're more privileged to get records than anybody else. Now, they have this whole team to research for
Yeah,
them.
if we had a
Yeah.
team, we could
I-
probably do a lot more.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
just for your normal, average, everyday person watching, it would take you longer to do it by yourself, but you can find these records. You just have to
If they're there.
searching, keep, you know, contact.
Or do like Mary and just jump down the rabbit hole.
Exactly, or be like Mary. You never know what you're going to find. So
Yeah, see, but part of me, because I'm not as accomplished as some of you guys in research, some of me, I still always think, but it's okay not to find it yourself.
well, that's true.
It's sometimes like if it came to Haiti, if I needed to research something in Haiti and I don't speak French, I have no idea how that works.
Mhm.
I might try to barter website services with the research or
There you go.
something.
See? There you go.
But yeah, I would look, I think it's also good advice to look for an expert in that
Yeah.
field, at least to get started,
Yes.
because you could also get so frustrated and spin your wheels for so long. It doesn't
Right.
always have to be hard.
Exactly.
Now I'll give a tip
It can be
too for-
expensive instead.
yeah, but I would give a tip too to reach out on some genealogy social media pages, because when
Yeah,
I
for sure.
found my 8th great grandfather's baptismal record from France, he was off of the Jersey Isles, they call them, off the coast of France.
Mhm.
It was in French, and I couldn't, you know, so I reached out on social media. I said, can anyone
Yeah,
translate? I mean, I tried to Google Translate, it didn't quite do it. And so I reached out, and also I had to learn, which I still really haven't wrapped my brain around it, the thing with the calendar, because it was before the calendar
Oh, right.
changed.
Change.
And
Yeah.
so that whole thing, and I just reached out and I said, hey, you know, I'm not afraid to say that I don't know what this is or how this works or what, you know, what.
Right.
And
No,
I got a lot
agree.
of great help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and especially the Facebook groups
Mhm.
can
Love
be
them.
really
Yeah,
helpful.
there's a great genealogy translations Facebook group
Yeah,
that I
I've used-
use.
Yeah, I've used them too. I even used them for shorthand before. So whatever you need translated.
Sure, sure.
Oh my gosh, I did shorthand in high school. I don't think I could read anything anymore.
I never learned it. So
I didn't either.
well, what about you, Shelley?
Okay. Well, I was doing one, selected one on the same episode as Laura. Gayle King. Most
We should
people,
probably say it was season 6, episode 15.
episode 15. Yes. And so Gayle King is known, number one, as Oprah Winfrey's BFF. And and they had different upbringings, but Gayle King's was funny, not only interesting, but it was funny. And there's so much she didn't know, number one.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
number one, she knew her grandmother was Emma, and Emma's daddy was white.
Mm.
And you were not supposed to ask her anything about her daddy.
Ah.
And number one, she said because she was ashamed of it, being white. And so, which was interesting because that is and can happen within families, especially mixed and, you know, or hiding or it's a survival thing as well. Also, not to know or to tell that you're a mixed race, you know, depending on the time and things like that. And I know in my own family research, I've come across that, you know, quite a bit. But anyway, Miss Emma was interesting. And also, they kind of didn't know who Miss Emma's daddy was. And so when the grandmother Emma died, the father's name that was on the death certificate was a John Brown. But here comes C.C. Moore and the DNA, and it wasn't anybody named John Brown. And of course, she was able to tap in. So there was a lot of DNA, you know, pretty much on this because they tapped into, I'm going to call it the bio father's line, which is the white line, and it was the COP, C-O-P as in Paul, E-S. And these folks were large families, but they were down in South Carolina, and I want to say the Orangeburg, Charleston area on the family. So that was very good. And she had no knowledge. So we made comments about oral history, somebody did earlier. And it just goes to show you some things just don't get handed down.
Yeah.
Especially, yeah, if they're a family secret or whatever.
Yes, or they're handed down. So you're protecting whoever came before you or something. And I think that's so critical. So by now, for our generation, well, my generation, you know, we know some of those stories because we were around, say, when the grandparents and great grandparents could have been alive. So we might have got different information. But anyway, so they talked about that and the DNA came up. First thing, Gayle had no idea. They show her the DNA. Skip goes to, well, Dr. Gates goes through talking about, you know, look, turn the page, and there's her DNA results. And she was 66.3% sub-Saharan African and 32% European. Basically, he's going to run it in the ground to her. You're a third white. No, basically, she's saying no. She just didn't realize, you know, that she had that much white. But as a side note, the average African American in this country has 25% European DNA. And we all should be able to understand how that comes about.
Right.
And so I don't need to explain that. But anyway, and so she's learning about the white ancestors. And again, it is totally just amazing on how much doesn't get handed down. And I keep throwing back to oral history because I just think it's so critical. And I dealt with this most of the morning, you know, on one of my lines, and I'm talking with Rick Murphy going through one of our lines. And I think DNA is just coming in and just busting everybody.
Exactly.
And you know how they talk about and it didn't happen on the show, but when they're talking about the DNA and down in the centimorgans and the lower the centimorgans, you know, if you get down to the 3 and 4, kind of unreliable. Well, let me tell you what, all weekend and this morning, Rick and I worked that 3.8
Did
and went
you?
right and got it right back where it needed to be.
Wow.
Right back who it went to. And because we knew I was related to his mother, and we didn't know why. We thought it was another line, and it's not. You know, and so, and I started with location, and I said, where are your people? So I took his book and tracked his mother's line from one of his books.
That was
So I think,
location-based. Yeah.
yeah, and so I kept going, and then, all right, who did I have that was within that area? And boom, 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 and then it just fell. Everything just fell. But, you know, the whole point I like about Gayle's story, we're finding this every day, that people, African Americans, are finding that same type thing with Issa, you know, not knowing about her white ancestor. But it was also now that she had locations.
Mhm.
And because she said, I'm going to go to, you know, thinking about going down to Orangeburg, South Carolina. But most of those folks, which was interesting for me, and I didn't get it from the story, he was saying we're not there now. Those ancestors, those white families that were down there. So I didn't hear anything about migration, what happened,
Mhm.
you know, or anything like that. So that was hers, just a, you know, the great story, the shock of her learning about her grandmother's bio family,
Yeah.
you know, and not being able to say anything because the grandmother was ashamed that she was
Right.
mixed with white as a mulatto, as she
Yeah.
called it. So anyway,
How did she
that's
feel?
it. On
How did she feel about knowing now and having the family know now? Because she's, I mean, she's got the book of life, right? Hopefully,
got
she's
the
going to
book
share
of-
it.
Yeah, she's got the book of life, and I think, you know, it was like, okay, we know where all this came from.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Yes, grandmother was, you know, the baby, you know, from slaveholder, whatever. So I don't think she took any to say, oh, I'm so excited and this, that, and other. You know, she's a reporter. She's a
Sure.
journalist.
Yeah.
And so she's gonna do more, is what I suspect.
Yeah,
Probably.
I suspect as well.
Yeah, and Issa too. I think Issa and Gayle, and both of them women of color, are going to do more, not necessarily just because of the mixtures or any of that. I think Issa is definitely going to learn more about the Haiti Revolution,
Mhm.
and because that was huge.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah,
really
and
huge.
and during Jordan Peele's thing, Dr. Gates they discussed this idea of inherited trauma.
Oh, yes, I heard about that. Yes.
And so you want to say something about that,
Yeah.
Shelley?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I have it. I say I have it. Well, let me say it this way. The research that I'm doing for the university is emotional. I
Mhm.
go up and down.
Mhm.
And it's both sides. It's not just the enslaved, because I'm also tracking the white family to, you know, to be able to gather these records. But I think there is some trauma there. And I think it's more trauma to me on the treatments and the things that they did, you know, and reading some of the stories from the families once I make contact with them. And I always share this one thing, and I do it in a lot of talks. And I think it was True Lewis and we both were looking at this record and the values that they put on. Because one of the lines I tracked that showed the mother's value and the two kids' value. And it was just like, you know, how do you do that? That's my 21st century thinking. 'Cause
Exactly.
back then it was so automatic.
Right.
But then there was one that True Lewis and this is a few years ago, it was $300.50.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't get the 50 cents.
50 cents. Yeah.
And
Wow.
yeah, it just was like, what the,
Yeah.
you know, what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah.
But also even the naming patterns, and this is a question that I've been coming up with, and all of these stories, you know, and you hear them hearing about the ancestors, and they find another name that's similar to somebody in the generation they know. And so I was shared an article a couple days ago where some slave masters named their kids after the days of the week, or you had the
Yeah.
Bible names,
Or mother.
but there was no rule or any common sense to why they got those names, you know, or whatever, or why they just didn't take their own name. You know, they're just, I was asking the question, was there any pattern to naming?
Mhm.
And it wasn't. And
Mhm.
anyway, just all the, I guess the oral history is to be able to help validate some of the oral history
Mhm.
for us as researchers. And it doesn't matter who your family,
Yeah.
white, black, or whatever. That is so critical, because even if it doesn't come out to be valid,
Mhm.
so many leads within the story
Sure.
that you have to be
Yeah.
able to go do it, you know.
That's what I, aside from going down the
Rabbit hole.
Clifford's rabbit hole, I'm working on a presentation called Really?
Yeah,
Proving and Refuting Family Lore.
I love
Yeah.
it.
And
I
so
love that. That's
That's
good.
a great title.
yeah.
It is. That's
So yeah, I'll be giving
Which is
that.
critical for our research. So that's really, for me, that's going to be a methodology class for me to hear,
Yeah.
you know, breaking all of that out. Because that's what I do. I'll take a document and break it down and, you know, try to respond to it. Try not to use my 21st century thinking,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
you know, to
It's
ask
hard.
questions.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard when you've heard this
It is.
story for it's been passed down for generations, and then
Yes.
somebody has the nerve to find documents to show you.
And it's not my job to
Yeah.
tell them that
Yeah.
story is wrong. And my famous thing, and here you go, Mary. Well, there's two versions of this story.
Two versions of the story.
One with a document and one that came
Yeah.
down 100
Yeah.
years. But I did it with my own family, with my mother and her 4 siblings. They knew that this land was donated. This is up in Michigan, was donated. And I fined $35. They sold it. 5 acres for the cemetery in the township of Joyfield.
Oh,
And again, it was like,
it's so hard. Yeah,
tell.
it's hard to tell.
And I
people.
told my mother, and she was like, "Oh no way!" Okay, well, there's 2 versions of this
Yeah.
story.
I like that. There's two versions.
Yeah, Mary, I can give you some good instances,
Yeah.
especially since I have one grandmother that lied about everything.
Yeah, she's right. Yeah.
But I always say there's family tradition and there's facts,
There
and
you go.
sometimes that one's it's a confirmation, and sometimes it's a juxtaposition.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for picking a story that you would like to share, so we could kind of catch up on finding your roots, and we will continue as the weeks go on to talk about the show. I think it's really important because we do learn things as we watch. So, you know, and then that leads us to discuss other things like, you know, all these things about oral history and debunking some of that stuff. Having the 2 versions. So anyway, what have you found with season 6 and the beginning of season 7? Is there something that you've learned from watching? Are there documents or methodologies or just fun stories that have really touched your heart? We would really, really love to hear about that. So so send us a message on the YouTube or on the blog post, and we will read it and we will rejoice with you for what you found. So it's always nice to hear what other people are learning and what they're finding. So with that, we will see you next time on Gen Friends. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.